The wind howled across the frozen fields like a wolf denied its prey. And Thomas Mallory had long since stopped feeling his fingers when he spotted the dark shape, collapsed against the fence line where his northern pasture met the woods. At first he thought it was a deer brought down by the cold, but as he trudged closer through knee-deep snow, his heart seized in his chest when he saw the green skin, the curve of tusks jutting from her slack mouth, and worst of all, the swell of her belly pressing against the tattered furs she wore. An orc, a pregnant orc, in his snowfield, during the worst blizzard to hit the northern territories in 20 years. Thomas stood there for a heartbeat too long, the wind tearing at his coat, his mind racing through every story he had heard about orcs since childhood. Savages who raided villages. Monsters who ate human flesh. Demons who stole children in the night. His father had died fighting orc raiders when Thomas was 12, and the scar across his own shoulder was a reminder of the day a war party had burned through their settlement 6 years back. But she was not raiding anything now. She was dying. He dropped to his knees beside her, and his hands moved before his head could finish arguing with his heart. Her skin was cold, far too cold, and her lips had a blue tinge that he recognized from the winter he had lost 3 sheep to exposure. She wore barely anything, just scraps of leather and fur that might have kept her warm in autumn but were worse than useless now. Her dark hair was crusted with ice, and when he pressed his fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse, he found it so faint and slow he almost missed it entirely. The baby. God help him, she was pregnant. Thomas slid his arms beneath her, grunting with effort as he lifted. She was heavy, all muscle and bone even in her current state, but he had spent 15 years working this farm alone since his mother passed, and his body knew how to carry weight. He stumbled twice on the way back to his cabin, but he did not fall, and he did not stop, even when his lungs burned and his legs screamed in protest. The warmth of the cabin hit him like a physical wall when he shouldered through the door. The fire he had built before going out to check the fences was still burning, throwing orange light across the single room that served as his kitchen, bedroom, and living space. He carried the orc woman to his bed and laid her down as gently as he could, then immediately turned to the fireplace. He stoked the fire until it roared, feeding it log after log until sweat dripped down his face and the cabin grew almost uncomfortably warm. Then he turned back to her, and his hands hesitated over the wet furs clinging to her body. Propriety warred with necessity, and necessity won. He peeled the frozen leather and fur away, trying not to look more than he had to, trying to focus on the task like she was an injured animal rather than a woman. Her skin was covered in scars. Old ones, white against the green. New ones, still pink and raised. A life of violence written across every inch of her. But beneath the scars, beneath the alien color of her skin, he could see she was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight. Strong features, high cheekbones, full lips split by those small tusks. Her body was powerful even in its current weakened state, muscles defined beneath the swell of her pregnant belly. He fetched every blanket he owned and piled them over her, then filled his largest pot with snow and set it over the fire to melt. While he waited for the water to warm, he checked her pulse again. Still faint, but maybe slightly stronger. Maybe. He wanted to believe it was stronger. Thomas pulled a chair beside the bed and sat, suddenly aware that he had just brought an orc into his home and had no idea what to do next. If the neighbors found out, they would call him a traitor. If the militia found out, they would likely kill her on sight, pregnant or not. The war between humans and orcs in these territories had been going on for generations, a bitter conflict over land and resources that had no end in sight. But looking at her now, unconscious and vulnerable, All he could see was someone who needed help, someone who would die without it. He spent the next hour warming water and using it to clean the ice from her hair and skin, working methodically to raise her body temperature without shocking her system. He had done this before with newborn lambs caught in late spring snows, and he prayed the principle was the same. Slow and steady. Warm but not hot. Her eyes opened when he was pressing a warm cloth to her forehead. They were amber, like honey held up to sunlight, and they stared at him with such profound confusion that he froze with the cloth still in his hand. "You are human," she said, her voice rough and rasping. "Yes," Thomas said, because there was no point denying it. "Why?" She tried to sit up, and he saw the moment the weakness hit her, saw her arms give out. She fell back against the pillows, breathing hard, one hand moving instinctively to her swollen belly. "Where am I? My cabin. You collapsed in my field. I brought you inside." The words came out clipped, factual, because he did not know how else to say them. She stared at him, and he could see her mind working behind those strange, beautiful eyes, trying to make sense of a situation that made no sense. "You should have left me. You would have died." "Yes." She said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "That would have been better." "Better than what?" Thomas set the cloth aside and met her gaze directly. "Better than being warm. Better than being alive," her jaw worked, tusks catching the firelight. "Better than being in debt to a human." The words hit him harder than they should have, but he pushed the feeling down and shook his head. "You are not in debt to me. I am just doing what any decent person would do." "I am Orc," she said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. Thomas stood and moved to the fire, using the motion to gather his thoughts. "Are you hungry? I should leave." But even as she said it, she was not moving, and they both knew she could not yet, possibly not for days. "There is a blizzard outside. You will die before you reach the tree line." He ladled stew from the pot he had left simmering over the fire, the same stew he had been eating for 3 days now. Venison, turnips, carrots, onions. Simple food, but hot and filling. He brought it to her in a wooden bowl along with a spoon. "Eat." She looked at the bowl like it might bite her, then slowly, carefully took it from his hands. Her fingers brushed his, and he noticed they were still too cold. She ate like someone who had not seen food in days, fast and focused, barely chewing. He let her finish before he spoke again. "How long since you ate?" 4 days, maybe 5. She set the empty bowl aside and would not look at him. "I was traveling south, away from my clan. The storm came faster than I expected." "Why were you traveling in winter, especially?" He gestured vaguely at her belly, not sure how to phrase it politely. Her expression hardened. "Because I was cast out." Thomas waited, and when she did not elaborate, he did not push. Instead, he took the bowl back to the fire and refilled it. "Eat more. You are feeding too." This time when he handed her the bowl, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. "You know about Orc pregnancy." "I know that pregnancy is pregnancy. Body needs more food, more rest." He sat back down in the chair. "I raise sheep. Same principles apply." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a scoff. "You compare me to sheep." "I compare pregnancy to pregnancy," Thomas said evenly. No insult intended. She ate more slowly this time, and he watched the color gradually return to her face. Not much, but some. The blue tinge faded from her lips, and her hands stopped shaking quite so badly. When she finished the second bowl, she set it aside and met his eyes again. "What is your name, human?" "Thomas Mallory. This is my farm." He paused. "What is yours?" "Grukara." She said it like a challenge, like she expected him to mock it or refuse to use it. "Grukara," he repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. "Good name." That surprised her, he could tell. Her eyes widened slightly, and her hand moved to her belly again in what he was starting to recognize as a protective gesture. "You have questions." "I have many questions," Thomas admitted, "but you need to rest more than I need answers. The bed is yours. I will sleep by the fire." "This is your bed. And you are pregnant and half frozen. The bed is yours," he said again, more firmly. He stood and gathered blankets from the chest at the foot of the bed, making it clear the discussion was over. When he turned back, she was still watching him with that wary, confused expression. "Why are you doing this?" Grukara asked, and her voice had lost some of its hardness. Now she just sounded tired and lost and very, very young. "Your people and my people are enemies." Thomas spread the blankets near the fire and sat down on them, his back against the stone hearth. The warmth soaked into his muscles, and he realized how exhausted he was. "My father died fighting orcs. I have a scar on my shoulder from an orc blade. I have every reason to hate your kind." He looked at her across the small cabin, at the way the firelight painted her green skin in shades of gold and amber. "But you are not a raiding party. You are a woman who needs help. That matters more." She was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You are either the kindest human I have ever met, or the most foolish." "Probably both," Thomas said, and this time he was certain she laughed. It was a small sound, quickly stifled, but it warmed something in his chest that had been cold for a very long time. He listened to her breathing slow and deepen as she drifted into sleep, and only then did he let himself relax. Outside, the wind continued to scream and snow piled against the windows, but inside his cabin it was warm. Inside his cabin, for the first time in years, he was not alone. He woke before dawn to find Grukara standing by the window, wrapped in one of his blankets, staring out at the white wasteland his farm had become. She must have heard him stir because she spoke without turning. "The storm has not stopped." "No." Thomas pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the stiffness in his back. Sleeping on the floor was considerably less comfortable than he remembered from his younger years. "It could last another day or two. These northern blizzards are vicious. I am trapped here." He heard the frustration in her voice, the barely contained panic, and he chose his words carefully. "You are safe here. That is what matters." She finally turned to look at him, and in the gray pre-dawn light she looked tired and worn. "Safe, in a human's cabin." "While my people hunt me and your people would kill me on sight." Her laugh was bitter. "Yes, very safe." Thomas moved to the fire and began building it back up, giving himself something to do with his hands. "Why does your clan hunt you?" "Because I dishonored them." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I refuse to kill the father of my child." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. Thomas paused with a log halfway to the fire, then slowly set it in place before turning to face her fully. "Explain." Grukara's jaw worked, her tusks catching the growing firelight. 6 months ago, my clan raided a human settlement to the east. I was with them. It is what we do, what we have always done. During the raid, I was supposed to kill a human man we had cornered, but he did not fight. He just looked at me and asked why. She closed her eyes. Such a simple question, why? No one had ever asked me that before. No one had ever made me question what I was doing. Thomas waited, his heart beating too fast in his chest. I let him live. I told him to run, and he did. But I stayed with the clan, and the raid continued. And then he found me 2 days later, tracked us through the woods like he was hunting deer. He should have come with weapons, with anger, but instead he came with questions. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know why we raided, why we fought, what we were fighting for. Her eyes opened, and they were bright with unshed tears. We talked through the night. One night became two, became a week of stolen conversations in the woods between my clan's camp and his town. and then talking became more. "You fell in love," Thomas said quietly. "I fell in love," she confirmed, "with a human, with an enemy. And when I realized I was carrying his child, I knew I could not hide it. Orc pregnancies show quickly and questions would be asked. So I told my chieftain the truth. I told him I loved a human and would not raise a child to hate its father's people." "What did he do?" Grukara's expression hardened into something cold and terrible. "He gave me a choice. Kill the human and the child, prove my loyalty to the clan, or be cast out as a traitor. I chose exile." Thomas absorbed this, his mind reeling. Where is he now, the father? Dead. The word was flat, emotionless, but he could see the pain beneath it. "My clan killed him 3 months ago. They told me before they exiled me, made sure I knew the price of my choice. They left his body at the edge of their territory as a warning to me and anyone else who might think to betray Orc ways." "God," Thomas breathed. "I am sorry." She shook her head sharply. "Do not apologize. You are not responsible for the cruelty of my people any more than I am responsible for the cruelty of yours." She moved away from the window, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. "I have been traveling for 3 months, trying to find somewhere safe to have this baby. Somewhere neither orcs nor humans will find us. But there is nowhere. This whole world is at war, and my child will be born into it with no place to belong." Thomas watched her pace, watched the desperate energy in her movements, the way her hand never left her belly for long. She was protecting a child that had no protection, loving something that the world would hate, and she was doing it alone. "Stay here," he said. She stopped mid-stride and stared at him like he had lost his mind. "What? Stay here? Through the winter at least? You cannot travel in this weather, and you will need help when the baby comes." He stood, meeting her incredulous gaze. "I have space, I have food, and I can keep you safe. You do not know me, you owe me nothing. You are right, I do not know you and I owe you nothing." Thomas moved closer, and he saw her tense, ready to bolt despite having nowhere to go. "But I know what it is like to be alone. I have been alone on this farm for 5 years, and it is a cold kind of life. If I can help you, if I can give your child a chance, then maybe my loneliness means something." Grukara's eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for ulterior motives, for anything that would make sense of his offer. "You would risk everything. If anyone found out you were harboring an orc, then we make sure no one finds out." He said it with more confidence than he felt. "The nearest neighbor is 3 miles south, and they do not visit in winter. The militia does not patrol this far north when the snows come. If we are careful, if you stay inside and out of sight, there is no reason anyone would know. And in spring, when the snow melts and your neighbors come calling," Thomas hesitated because he did not have a good answer for that. "We will figure it out. One season at a time." She was silent for a long moment, her amber eyes locked on his, and he could see the war being waged inside her. Pride against necessity, suspicion against hope. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "1 season, through the winter. When spring comes, I leave." "Agreed." He held out his hand, a human gesture of agreement, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her grip was strong, her palm calloused from a lifetime of fighting, and the touch sent an unexpected jolt through him that he pushed down and ignored. They had an agreement. That was all. That was enough. The first week passed in careful awkwardness as they learned to exist in the same space. Thomas gave Grukara the bed and insisted she rest as much as possible. And after 2 days of arguing, she finally gave in, too exhausted to fight him anymore. He slept by the fire and woke before dawn each day to check the animals in the barn, feed them, gather eggs from the chickens who had huddled together against the cold. The blizzard finally broke on the 5th day, leaving behind a world transformed into white silence. Snow drifted as high as the cabin windows on the north side, and Thomas spent hours each day digging paths from the cabin to the barn, from the barn to the well, maintaining the narrow corridors that let him do the necessary work of keeping a farm alive through winter. Grukara watched him from the window, and sometimes when he came back inside, red-faced and panting from exertion, he would find hot tea waiting for him and bread warming by the fire. Small gestures, quiet thank yous that she could not quite voice. "You do not have to do that," he said on the 8th day, accepting a cup of tea gratefully. "I know." She was sitting at the table, mending one of his shirts that had torn at the shoulder. Her hands moved with practiced ease, the needle flashing in and out of the fabric. "But I cannot sit idle. I will go mad." Thomas sat across from her, cradling the warm cup in his cold hands. "Where did you learn to sew, my mother, before she died?" Grukara did not look up from her work. "She said every orc woman should know how to mend what breaks, clothes, tools, bones, all the same principles." Smart woman. She was. A pause, and then, "She would have hated what I did, falling in love with a human, carrying a half-blood child, but I think she would have understood why I could not kill for the clan anymore." Thomas sipped his tea, letting the warmth spread through his chest. "What was his name?" "The father." Grukara's hand stilled on the shirt. For a moment he thought she would not answer, but then she spoke, her voice soft. "Aldrich. His name was Aldrich Nash. He was a carpenter in his village, made furniture and houses. He had kind hands." She resumed sewing, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "He wanted to build a cradle for the baby. He showed me the wood he had picked out, told me about all the carvings he would put on it. Animals and trees and stars, a whole world for our child to look at while falling asleep. He sounds like a good man. He was the best man I have ever known." She finished the mending and bit off the thread with her teeth, tusks glinting. "And my people murdered him for the crime of being human and in love." The bitterness in her voice was a living thing, sharp and painful, and Thomas found himself reaching across the table to rest his hand over hers. She froze at the contact, her eyes snapping up to meet his. "I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "No one should have to pay that price for love." Grukara looked at his hand on hers, and something complicated passed across her face. Then she slowly turned her hand over and squeezed his fingers once before pulling away. "Thank you." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. More comfortable. More like understanding. The second week brought a cold snap that froze the water in the well and killed 2 of Thomas's chickens, despite his best efforts to keep them warm. He buried them in the snow behind the barn, his breath misting in the air, his fingers numb even inside his gloves. When he came back to the cabin, Grukara took one look at his face and poured him something from a small flask she had produced from somewhere in her belongings. "Drink," she ordered, pressing the cup into his hands. He drank, and immediately his eyes watered and his throat burned. "What is this?" "Orc fire spirit. We make it from fermented grain and winter berries." She took the cup back and had a small sip herself. "It will warm you faster than tea." She was right. Within minutes, warmth spread through his limbs, and the terrible cold that had settled into his bones began to recede. He leaned back against the wall and watched her move around the cabin, tidying things that did not need tidying, restless energy in every movement. "You are getting stronger," he observed. "Yes, your food is good and the rest helps." She paused, one hand on her belly. "The baby is active today. I think it knows spring is still far away and wants to protest." "May I?" Thomas asked and gestured to her stomach. Grukara tensed, her whole body going rigid, and he immediately regretted asking. "Sorry, that was inappropriate." "No, I." She took a breath and moved closer, standing in front of where he sat. "You can. If you want." Thomas stood so he would not have to reach up, and slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, he placed his palm against the swell of her belly. For a moment there was nothing, and then he felt it. A flutter, then a solid thump against his hand. "There," Grukara said unnecessarily, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Strong," Thomas said, marveling at the feeling. "Life growing and thriving against all odds. Takes after the mother. Or the father." Aldrich was stronger than he looked. Her hand covered his on her belly, and they stood like that for a moment. Two people from enemy peoples connected by the miracle of a child neither of them had made but both of them wanted to protect. When Thomas pulled his hand away, something had shifted between them again. Something he could not quite name but could definitely feel. The third week brought a thaw, a brief warming that turned the top layer of snow to slush and made the paths to the barn treacherous. Thomas spent a morning reinforcing the barn roof where the weight of snow had stressed the beams, and when he came back to the cabin, he found Grukara cooking. "You do not have to do that," he said, but his stomach growled at the smell, betraying him. "I was hungry, and I assume you will be as well." She stirred the pot over the fire, and he noticed she had added things to his simple stew. Herbs from the bundles hanging in the corner, roots he had harvested in autumn, some kind of spice from her own supplies that made the whole cabin smell rich and warm. "Sit, eat." He sat, and when she handed him a bowl he tasted it and nearly groaned. It was the best thing he had eaten in months, maybe years. Where did you learn to cook like this? Necessity. When you are traveling alone, you learn to make food that will keep you strong. She sat across from him with her own bowl. "Also, your cooking is terrible, no offense." Thomas laughed, surprised by the teasing in her voice. "None taken. I know my limits, and cooking is definitely one of them." They ate in companionable silence, and Thomas found himself watching her. Really watching her, not just seeing an orc, but seeing Grukara. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The way her tusks caught her lower lip when she was concentrating. The way firelight made her green skin look soft and warm instead of alien and frightening. She was beautiful. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he had to look away, his heart hammering in his chest. This was dangerous. She was orc. She was pregnant with another man's child. She was only staying through winter, and he was letting himself feel things that could only lead to pain. He needed to get control of himself. "Thomas," her voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you well?" "Fine. Just tired." He finished his stew quickly and stood, needing distance. "I should check the animals again before dark." He fled to the barn like a coward and spent an hour longer than necessary with the sheep, brushing them down, checking their hooves, doing anything to avoid going back to the cabin, and facing what he had just realized. When he finally returned, Grukara was asleep in the bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Thomas built up the fire and lay down in his blankets, staring at the ceiling beams and calling himself every kind of fool. The fourth week brought more snow, and with it, a sense of being truly cut off from the world. No one could reach them even if they tried, and the isolation that Thomas had once found lonely now felt like protection. Here, in this cabin, they did not have to be human and orc. They could just be Thomas and Grukara, two people surviving winter together. They fell into a routine. Thomas would wake first, build up the fire, and go tend the animals. Grukara would have breakfast ready when he returned, and they would eat together in the early morning light. Then he would do repairs around the farm while she rested or sewed or cooked. In the evenings they would talk. At first the conversations were simple. Weather, food, plans for the next day, but gradually they deepened. Grukara told him about her childhood in the orc clans, about the constant raids and battles, about growing up knowing that humans were the enemy and never questioning why. Thomas told her about his parents, about learning to farm from his father before the orcs killed him, about his mother's slow decline after losing her husband, about the loneliness of the years since. "You hate us?" Grukara asked one night, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "Orcs, I mean." "For what we took from you." Thomas considered the question carefully. "I did. For a long time I hated all orcs. Every time I looked at my father's grave or touched the scar on my shoulder, I hated you all." He met her gaze. "But hatred is exhausting. At some point I realized I was letting rage consume my life, and it was not bringing my father back or making anything better. So I let it go. Just like that. Not just like that. It took years. But eventually, yes," he paused. "Meeting you helps. Hard to hate all orcs when I know one who is brave enough to choose love over war." Grukara looked away, but not before he saw the emotion in her eyes. "I was not brave. I was selfish. I put my own desires above my clan's needs. You put love above hate. That is not selfish. That is revolutionary." She laughed, but it was a broken sound. "Revolutionary, yes, look where it got me. Alone, exiled, carrying a child who will never know their father." "Not alone," Thomas said firmly. "Not anymore." Their eyes met across the cabin, and the air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Grukara broke the gaze first, standing abruptly and moving to the window. "The snow is falling again." "Yes." Thomas's voice came out rougher than he intended. "It will be a long winter." "Good," she said softly. "I am not ready for it to end." Neither was he, Thomas realized. He was not ready for spring, for the day when Grukara would leave and take the warmth she had brought into his life with her. But spring would come whether he was ready or not. So he said nothing and simply watched the snow fall beyond the window, each flake a moment of borrowed time. The 5th week brought a test neither of them had anticipated. Thomas woke in the middle of the night to the sound of Grukara gasping in pain. He was on his feet and beside the bed in an instant, his heart racing. "What is wrong?" "The baby." Her face was contorted, one hand gripping her belly. "Something is wrong." Terror, cold and sharp, lanced through him. "Tell me what you are feeling." "Pain. Sharp pain low in my belly and pressure like—" She gasped again, her whole body tensing. "Like the baby is coming, but it is too soon. I am only 6 months along. It is too soon." Thomas's mind raced through everything he knew about birthing, gleaned from years of helping use lamb. Too early was bad, very bad, but panic would not help either of them. "Breathe. Slow, deep breaths. I need to examine you, see if there is bleeding." She nodded, and he pulled back the blankets with shaking hands. No blood. That was good. That meant the child was not miscarrying, at least not yet. He pressed gently on her abdomen, trying to remember what the midwife had done when his mother had lost a baby between him and the sister who never was. "The baby is moving." "Yes, too much. It hurts." Another gasp, and tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "I cannot lose this child. I cannot. It is all I have left of him." "You will not lose the child." Thomas said it with a conviction he did not entirely feel, but she needed his strength now, not his fear. "This could be false labor. Sometimes it happens when the body is stressed or tired. We just need to keep you calm and resting." He spent the next 3 hours beside her, pressing warm cloths to her belly, talking to her in a low, steady voice, keeping her breathing slow and even. Gradually, painfully slowly, the contractions eased. The pain faded. The baby's movements gentled. By dawn, Grukara was asleep, exhausted, and Thomas sat in the chair beside the bed, his head in his hands, shaking with the aftershocks of terror. He had come so close to losing her, to losing them both, and the realization of how much that would have destroyed him was overwhelming. He cared for her, more than cared. Somewhere in the past 5 weeks, he had fallen halfway in love with an orc woman carrying another man's child, and there was no taking it back now. When Grukara woke, it was late morning and Thomas was cooking breakfast with the grim determination of a man who needed something to do with his hands. She sat up slowly, wincing. "How do you feel?" he asked without turning around. "Sore, tired, but better." She paused. "Thank you. For last night, you saved my baby's life." "Our baby's life," Thomas said, and then froze as the words registered. He turned to face her, and the shock on her face mirrored his own. "I am sorry, I did not mean. I know it is not my child, I just—" "No," Grukara's voice was soft, wondering. "Do not apologize. You have done more for this baby than anyone except Aldrich. You have every right to care about it." They stared at each other across the cabin, and Thomas saw the moment the walls she had built around herself began to crack. Saw the loneliness and fear and desperate need for connection that mirrored his own. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of doing this alone. Afraid of failing this child the way I failed Aldrich." Thomas crossed to the bed and sat on the edge, taking her hand in his. "You did not fail Aldrich. The world failed both of you, but you do not have to do this alone, not if you do not want to." "What are you saying?" He had not planned this, had not thought it through. But sitting there with her hand in his, the words came anyway. "Stay, not just through winter, stay. Help me run this farm, raise your child here, let me be part of this. I know I am not the father, I know I cannot replace him, but I can be here and I want to be if you will let me." Grukara's eyes filled with tears, and for a long moment she said nothing. "Then, you would do that? Raise another man's half-orc child as your own?" "I would be honored to do that." She pulled her hand from his and covered her face, her shoulders shaking. Thomas sat frozen, unsure if she was laughing or crying or both. When she finally lowered her hands, her face was wet, but she was smiling. "You are insane." "Probably," Thomas agreed. "The neighbors will run you out when they find out. Let them try. Your people will call you a traitor. I have been called worse." Grukara shook her head, but she was still smiling, and when she reached for his hand again, he gave it gladly. "One condition. Anything, you teach me to farm. I will not be dead weight living off your charity. I pull my own weight or this does not work." Thomas laughed, relief and joy and terror all mixing in his chest. "Deal." They shook on it, and this time when their hands touched, neither of them pulled away quickly. They sat there, fingers intertwined, and Thomas thought that this might be the most important agreement he had ever made. The 6th week was when everything changed. Grukara had recovered from the false labor, and true to her word, she insisted on learning the farm work. Thomas was hesitant at first, worried about her condition, but she was stubborn and strong, and eventually he gave in. He taught her to feed the chickens and collect eggs, to clean the barn and brush down the sheep. He showed her how to check the hay stores and mend tack, how to read the weather and plan for the next storm. She learned quickly, her hands sure and her mind sharp, and Thomas found himself looking forward to each morning when they would work side by side in the barn, their breath misting in the cold air, their shoulders occasionally brushing. One morning when the sun was bright on the snow and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe, Grukara laughed at something Thomas said, and the sound was so unexpected and joyful that he stopped mid-sentence to stare at her. "What?" she asked, her smile fading. "Do I have something on my face?" "No, I have never heard you laugh like that before, like you were truly happy." She considered this, her head tilted in that way he had come to adore. "I think I am. Happy, I mean. For the first time in months I feel like maybe things will be all right. They will be." Thomas said it with certainty because he needed it to be true. "We will make sure of it." She stepped closer, and in the dim light of the barn, with hay dust floating around them and the sheep making soft noises in their pens, she reached up and touched his face. Her palm was rough and warm against his cold cheek, and Thomas froze, barely breathing. "You are a good man, Thomas Mallory, better than I deserve." "That is not true." "It is. But I am selfish enough not to care." She was so close now that he could see the individual shades of amber in her eyes, could count the small freckles scattered across her green skin. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why are you really doing this? And do not say because it is the right thing. There is more to it than that. I can see it in the way you look at me." Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs, and he knew he was at a crossroads. He could lie, protect himself, keep things simple and safe. Or he could tell the truth and risk everything. He chose truth. "Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks I fell in love with you." Grukara's breath caught, and her hand on his face trembled. "Thomas, I know it is insane. I know you loved Aldrich, and I am not trying to replace him. I know you are orc and I am human, and the whole world would condemn us for this. But I cannot help how I feel, and I needed you to know." He covered her hand with his, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. "You do not have to feel the same way. I am not asking for anything. I just needed you to know the truth." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the war being waged in her eyes. Fear and desire, grief and hope, caution and longing, all battling for dominance. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. "I am terrified," she whispered. "So am I. I did not think I could feel this way again. After Aldrich, I thought that part of me was dead." "Is it?" Thomas asked, barely breathing. "No." Her voice broke on the word. "It is not. And that terrifies me more than anything, because I cannot lose someone else I love. I cannot survive that again. Then we will not lose each other. We will fight for this, whatever it takes." Grukara pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, and what he saw there made his heart soar. "You are sure? Once we cross this line, there is no going back." "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." She kissed him then, and it was nothing like he had imagined. It was hesitant and uncertain, her tusks bumping awkwardly against his lip, both of them unsure of the mechanics. But it was also perfect because it was them. Two broken people trying to fit their pieces together. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Grukara was smiling. "That was awkward," Thomas finished. "Very awkward." She laughed. "We will need practice." "I am willing to put in the work if you are." She kissed him again, and this time it was better. Still not perfect, but better. And when they finally pulled apart and went back to work, everything felt different. The air felt lighter. The work felt easier. The future felt possible. That night, Thomas gave up his spot by the fire and joined Grukara in the bed. They lay facing each other in the darkness, not touching beyond their intertwined hands, and talked until the early hours of the morning. "Tell me about your farm," she said. "About what you want for it." Thomas talked about his dreams of expanding, of getting more sheep and maybe some cattle, of building a larger barn and a proper smokehouse. He talked about wanting to make something his father would have been proud of, about leaving a legacy beyond just survival. "And now," Grukara asked softly, "do those dreams include me?" "Every single one of them," Thomas said honestly. "You and the baby. I want to build something for all of us." She was quiet for a moment, and then, "I want to plant a garden in spring. A big one with vegetables and herbs and flowers." Aldrich loved flowers. He said they reminded him that beauty could exist even in a world at war. "Then we will plant the biggest garden in the Northern Territories," Thomas promised. "And we will teach your child to tend it." "Our child," Grukara corrected softly. "If you meant what you said about raising it as your own." "I did. I do." She brought their joined hands to her lips and kissed his knuckles, and Thomas felt something in his chest crack open and bloom. The 7th and 8th weeks passed in a blur of contentment that Thomas had never experienced before. They worked together, ate together, slept together, though they did not progress beyond kissing and gentle touches. Grukara was still pregnant and mourning, and Thomas was in no hurry. They had time. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had all the time in the world. He learned her moods, her preferences, the way she liked her tea and the food she craved. He learned that she hummed while she cooked, old orc battle songs transformed into lullabies. He learned that she was ticklish just below her ribs and that she snored softly when she slept on her back. She learned his habits in turn. Learned that he was grumpy before his morning tea and that he worried about the sheep obsessively during cold snaps. Learned that he had nightmares sometimes about the raid that had killed his father and that he needed to be held after, not talked to, just held. They learned to be a partnership, and it felt as natural as breathing. But the outside world had not forgotten them, even if they had forgotten it. The 9th week brought a visitor. Thomas was in the barn repairing a broken stall door when he heard the dogs barking. Not the usual alert bark when a fox prowled too close to the chickens, but the aggressive, territorial bark that meant a stranger was approaching. He dropped his tools and ran for the cabin, his heart in his throat. Grukara was at the window, her face pale. Someone is coming, a human on horseback. Thomas's mind raced. If Grukara was seen, if word got out that he was harboring an orc, they would both be killed. The cellar. Now, Thomas. Now. He practically dragged her to the trapdoor hidden beneath the rug near the bed, pulled it open, and helped her down the ladder into the cold, dark space below. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. I will get rid of them. He closed the trapdoor and rearranged the rug, then forced himself to take a deep breath and school his features into something resembling calm. By the time the knock came at the door, he had his racing heart mostly under control. He opened the door to find Tobias Miller, his nearest neighbor, standing on the porch covered in snow. Tobias was a good man, a fellow farmer in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, and Thomas had known him since childhood. Tobias, what brings you out in this weather? Just checking on you, lad. Have not seen smoke from your chimney in days, and I was worried the cold had got you. Tobias stamped snow off his boots. May I come in? It is freezing out here. Thomas had no choice but to step aside, his mind scrambling for how to explain anything that might look suspicious. Tobias entered, looking around the cabin with the casual interest of a concerned neighbor, and Thomas's heart sank when he saw Tobias's eyes land on the second bowl on the table, the woman's shawl draped over the chair, the small mending basket that was definitely not his. Got company? Tobias asked, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, a cousin from the south. She came to visit and got caught in the storms. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth, but it was better than the truth. She. Tobias's eyebrows rose. You have not mentioned a cousin before, distant cousin. Very distant. She is sleeping now. Rough journey. Thomas moved toward the door, hoping to guide Tobias back out. I appreciate you checking on me, but as you can see, I am fine. Tobias did not move. Instead, his eyes went to the bed, and Thomas's blood ran cold when he realized Grukara's leather bracers were sitting on the chest at the foot of the bed. Orc-made bracers, unmistakable in their design. Thomas. Tobias's voice had changed, gone hard. What is really going on here? Nothing. I told you. Do not lie to me, boy. I have known you since you were in swaddling clothes. Tobias crossed to the bracers and picked them up, examining the intricate toolwork. These are orc-made. Why do you have orc weapons in your home? Thomas's mind went blank. He could not think of a single believable lie, and the silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Where is she?" Tobias asked quietly. "Who?" "The orc. Because that is what is happening here, is it not? You are harboring an orc." Tobias's face was unreadable. "Are you being held against your will, threatened? I can get the militia." "No." Thomas stepped forward, hands raised. "No militia, please, it is not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Thomas looked at the older man, at the concern and confusion warring on his weathered face, and made a decision. Tobias had known his father, had helped his mother through her grief, had been there for every important moment of Thomas's life. If there was anyone who might understand, it was him. "She is not holding me hostage. She is. She needed help. She was dying in my field, pregnant and alone, and I could not just leave her. I brought her inside, and then the storms came, and she has been here ever since." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know it is illegal. I know what people will think, but she is not a monster, Tobias. She is just a woman who needs help." Tobias set the bracers down slowly and rubbed his face with both hands. "Lord help us, Thomas. You understand what you have done if anyone else finds out. I know the risks. Do you? Because they will not just exile you. They will hang you for treason. And her, they will kill her on sight, pregnant or not." Tobias looked toward the cellar door, somehow knowing exactly where Grukara was hidden. "She can hear us, can she not?" "Yes," came Grukara's voice from below, muffled but clear. "Come up then. No point hiding now." Tobias moved to the table and sat heavily. "Might as well see what I am being asked to keep secret." Thomas opened the trapdoor and helped Grukara up. She climbed into the cabin, and to her credit, she did not cower or apologize. She stood tall, one hand on her pregnant belly, and met Tobias's gaze directly. "I am Grukara. I mean no harm to Thomas or anyone in this territory." Tobias studied her for a long moment, taking in her green skin, her tusks, her obvious pregnancy. "And the father, dead, killed by my own clan for the crime of being human." Something flickered across Tobias's face, surprise maybe, or sympathy. "That is a hard road you have walked." "Yes." Grukara's voice was steady, but Thomas could see her hands shaking. "Thomas offered me shelter through the winter. I will leave in spring. I ask only that you not condemn him for showing mercy." "Mercy?" Tobias laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Is that what we are calling it?" He looked between them, and Thomas saw the moment understanding dawned. "Lord above, you care for each other." "Yes," Thomas said, because there was no point denying it. Tobias was quiet for a very long time, and Thomas could see him wrestling with something. Finally, the older man sighed. "Your father would have my head for what I am about to say, Tobias. But your mother, God rest her soul, always said that mercy was worth more than vengeance." Tobias stood and moved to the door, and Thomas's heart sank, certain he was about to leave and bring back the militia. But instead Tobias turned back, his face grave. "I will not tell anyone what I saw here. As far as anyone asks, I checked on you, you were fine, and that is all." Thomas's knees nearly gave out with relief. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Because I am going to give you both some advice, and you had better listen." Tobias pointed at Grukara. "That baby you are carrying, it will show orc heritage. You cannot hide what it is, which means come spring you cannot be anywhere near here. People will ask questions." "I know," Grukara said quietly. "No, I do not think you do." Tobias's voice was firm but not unkind. "There are settlements west of here, beyond the mountains, where humans and orcs have started trading instead of fighting, places where a mixed child might have a chance. If you are smart, you will head there when the snow melts." "Both of us," Thomas said firmly. "I am going with her." Tobias closed his eyes briefly, pain crossing his face. "Your father's farm is just land and buildings. She matters more." The older man was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded slowly. Your father would have hated this, but he also raised you to stand by your convictions, even when they were hard, so I suppose in a way he would have been proud. He opened the door, letting in a gust of cold air. Be careful, both of you. And Thomas, if you need anything before spring, you know where I live. Thank you, Tobias, for everything. The older man nodded once more and left, and Thomas closed the door behind him, leaning against it as the weight of what had just happened settled over him. Grukara crossed to him and took his face in her hands. You would truly leave your home for me, your father's farm, your whole life, in a heartbeat. Thomas covered her hands with his. You and the baby, you are my life now. Everything else is just details. She kissed him then, deep and desperate, and he wrapped his arms around her, careful of her belly, and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. The 10th through 12th weeks were a strange mix of happiness and preparation. Thomas and Grukara continued to grow closer, their relationship deepening from tentative affection into something solid and real. But now, they both knew it had an expiration date. Spring would come, and they would have to leave, and Thomas began the painful process of preparing to abandon everything he had ever known. He started selling off livestock, telling neighbors he was reducing his herd for the winter. He sorted through his possessions, deciding what was essential and what could be left behind. He wrote letters to Tobias, leaving him instructions for the farm and permission to sell it if he could find a buyer. Grukara watched all of this with guilt written across her face, and one night she broke down crying at the table. You should not have to do this. This farm is your legacy, your father's legacy. I cannot ask you to give it up. You are not asking. I am choosing. Thomas knelt beside her chair and took her hands. This farm was my father's dream, not mine. I stayed here because I did not know what else to do, but it was never what I wanted. You are what I want. You and the baby and a life we build together, wherever that takes us. What if you regret it? Her voice was small, frightened. What if we get to this western settlement and you realize you made a mistake? Then we will deal with it together. But I will not regret choosing you. I could never regret that. He leaned up and kissed her, tasting salt from her tears. Have faith in us. I am trying. She rested her forehead against his. You have given me so much hope, Thomas. After Aldrich died, I thought I would never feel this way again, and now I am terrified of losing it. You will not lose me, I promise you that. It was a promise he hoped he could keep. The 13th week brought another scare with the baby. Grukara woke in the night gasping, and Thomas jolted awake beside her, instantly alert. What is wrong, the baby? It is not moving. Her voice was panicked, her hands pressed to her belly. It always moves at night, but I cannot feel anything. Thomas pressed his own hands to her stomach, trying to detect movement, but felt nothing. His mind raced through possibilities, most of them terrible. How long since you felt movement? I fell asleep around sunset. I just woke now. What if? Her voice broke. What if I already lost it and did not know? We are not going to think like that. Thomas tried to project a calm he did not feel. Sometimes babies sleep. Sometimes they are just quiet. We need to give it a moment. But moments passed, then minutes, and still nothing. Grukara's breathing was becoming ragged with panic, and Thomas was about to suggest they try something, anything, when he felt it. The tiniest flutter beneath his palm. There, he breathed. There, did you feel that? Yes, yes. Grukara's whole body sagged with relief as the baby began to move more actively, as if it had just been waiting for the right moment to remind them it was still there. Oh, thank God. Thomas pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, releasing all the fear and tension of the past few minutes. When she finally calmed, he kissed the top of her head and spoke the words that had been building in his heart for weeks. Marry me. Grukara went very still. What? Marry me. I know we cannot do it legally, not here, but we can do it in our hearts. We can make promises to each other that mean something. He pulled back enough to look at her face. I love you, Grukara. I want you to be my wife in every way that matters. Thomas, She searched his face. You know I loved Aldrich. He will always be part of me. I know. And I am not asking you to forget him or replace him. I am just asking you to let me love you and the child you made together for the rest of my life. He took her hand and pressed it to his chest over his heart. Marry me, please. Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, I will marry you. They spoke their vows that night, in the darkness of the cabin with no witness except the dying fire and the sheep in the barn beyond. Thomas promised to love and protect her, to raise her child as his own, to stand by her against a world that would condemn them. Grukara promised to love and honor him, to build a life by his side, to trust him with her heart even though it was scarred and fragile. When they finished, they sealed the promises with a kiss, and Thomas felt something fundamental shift in his soul. Whatever came next, whatever hardships they faced, they would face them as husband and wife. The 14th and 15th weeks passed in a haze of preparation and waiting. The snow began to melt, and with it came the knowledge that their time here was limited. Thomas finalized arrangements with Tobias, who would take over the farm and send any profits to a contact address out west. He packed their supplies carefully, planning the route through the mountains, calculating how far a pregnant woman could travel in a day. Grukara was enormous now, her belly so large she could barely see her feet, and Thomas worried constantly about making the journey. But when he voiced these concerns, she shut him down firmly. I have come this far, I will make it the rest of the way. But if the baby comes while we are traveling, then you will deliver it just like you have delivered lambs. She said it with such confidence that he almost believed it would be that simple. The night before they were set to leave, Thomas stood in the doorway of the cabin and looked around at the only home he had ever known, the bed where his mother had died. The fireplace his father had built with his own hands, the table where he had eaten 1,000 solitary meals before Grukara had arrived and filled the space with life. Regrets? Grukara asked softly from behind him. No. He turned to face her and he meant it. This was never my home. It was my father's. My home is wherever you are. She wrapped her arms around him as much as her belly would allow, and they stood there in the empty cabin, holding each other, until the fire burned low and the night grew cold. They left at dawn. Thomas loaded their supplies onto his strongest horse and helped Grukara into the saddle, then climbed up behind her. She was too pregnant to walk far, and he would not risk her or the baby. He took one last look at the farm, at the fields his father had plowed and the barn his grandfather had raised, and then he turned the horse west and did not look back. The journey through the mountains was harder than Thomas had anticipated. The trails were muddy with snowmelt and Grukara tired quickly, needing frequent rests. They made slow progress, covering maybe 10 miles a day when Thomas had hoped for 20. But he did not push. He was patient, and when Grukara apologized for slowing them down, he kissed her and told her they had all the time in the world. On the 5th day of travel, they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from a valley below. A settlement larger than Thomas had expected, with houses built in a mix of human and orc styles. A trading post, he realized. One of the places Tobias had told them about, where two peoples were learning to coexist. Is that it? Grukara asked, her voice filled with wonder. I think so. Thomas felt hope bloom in his chest. Our new home. They descended into the valley, and as they drew closer, Thomas saw that the settlement was indeed mixed. Humans and orcs walking the same streets, trading goods, talking and laughing together. Children played in the mud, some green-skinned, some not, some a mix of both. It was strange and beautiful and exactly what they needed. They found an inn that rented rooms, and the orc woman at the desk barely blinked at the sight of them. "How long will you be staying?" "We are looking to settle," Thomas said. "Is there land available?" "Plenty of land. Good farming land too, if that is what you are after." She looked at Grukara's belly. "You will want to see the midwife soon. We have 2 in town, 1 human, 1 orc." Grukara's hand tightened on Thomas's arm, and he could feel her trembling. "Thank you," he said. "We appreciate it." The woman showed them to a room, and as soon as the door closed, Grukara collapsed onto the bed and started crying. Not sad tears, but overwhelmed, relieved tears. "We made it," she whispered. "We actually made it." Thomas sat beside her and pulled her into his arms. "We made it, and we are going to be happy here. I can feel it." They spent the next 2 weeks settling in. Thomas found a plot of land on the edge of the settlement. Good soil and a freshwater stream running through it. He bought it with the money from selling his livestock and immediately began planning where to build the house, where to plant the crops, where to put the barn they would need. Grukara visited the midwife, an older orc woman named Shakara, who examined her thoroughly and declared both mother and baby healthy. "You will deliver within the month," Shakara said. "Maybe sooner. The baby has dropped." That night, as they lay in their rented room making plans for their future, Grukara took Thomas's hand and placed it on her belly. "Do you feel that?" He felt the baby moving, stronger than ever, and he smiled. "Active tonight. I have been thinking about names." She looked at him shyly. "If it is a boy, I want to name him Aldrich, after his father. Is that all right?" "Of course." Thomas kissed her gently. "And if it is a girl, I do not know. I thought perhaps you should choose." Thomas thought about it, about the women who had shaped his life. His mother, who had loved so fiercely. His grandmother, who had been the strongest person he had ever known. And Grukara, who had survived more than anyone should have to and still found the courage to hope. "Elijah," he said. "It means hope. It seems fitting." Grukara smiled. "Elijah, I love it." 2 weeks later, in the early hours of the morning, Grukara woke Thomas with a hand on his shoulder and 3 words that sent his heart racing. "The baby is coming." Thomas had helped deliver dozens of lambs, but this was different. This was Grukara, screaming in pain on the bed while Shakara barked orders at him. This was terrifying and miraculous and endless. Hours passed, the sun rose and set, and still Grukara labored. "You are doing so well," Thomas told her, holding her hand and letting her squeeze until his bones ached. "So strong, I am so proud of you." "I cannot," she gasped. "I cannot do this. You can. You are, just a little longer." Shakara examined her again and nodded. "The baby is crowning. 1 more big push and you will meet your child." Grukara pushed, screaming, and Thomas felt tears streaming down his face as he watched. 1 final push, and then suddenly the room was filled with the sound of a baby crying, loud and indignant and perfect. "A boy," Shakara announced, holding up the wriggling green infant. "A healthy boy." She cleaned him quickly and placed him on Grukara's chest, and Thomas watched his wife's face transform with wonder and love as she looked at her son for the first time. "Aldrich," she whispered, touching his tiny face. "Hello, Aldrich. I am your mother." The baby quieted at her voice, his eyes trying to focus on her face, and Thomas felt his heart shatter and reform all at once. This child, this perfect little person, was theirs to love and protect. Their son. "You want to hold him?" Grukara asked, looking up at Thomas with exhausted joy. "Yes." Thomas carefully took the baby, supporting his head the way Shakara showed him, and looked down at Aldrich's face. The baby had his mother's green skin and small tusks, but his eyes were blue like his father's had been, according to Grukara. He was beautiful. He was perfect. He was theirs. "Welcome to the world, Aldrich," Thomas said softly. "We have been waiting for you." The first months of Aldrich's life were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Thomas built their house with help from neighbors, both human and orc, and by the time winter came again, they had a home. A real home, with a nursery for Aldrich and a large kitchen for Grukara, and a bedroom where Thomas fell asleep every night beside his wife, grateful for every moment they had together. Aldrich grew quickly, a happy baby who laughed easily and loved being held. He had his mother's strength and his father's gentle nature, and watching him develop was the greatest joy of Thomas's life. One evening, when Aldrich was nearly 6 months old, Thomas came in from working the fields to find Grukara standing in the garden they had planted together. The flowers were blooming, bright and colorful, exactly as Aldrich's father would have wanted. "You are thinking about him," Thomas said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Yes." Grukara did not look away from the flowers. "I wish he could have met his son. He would have loved him so much." "I know, and Aldrich will know about his father. We will make sure of it." Thomas took her hand. "But he will also know he has another father who loves him just as much." Grukara turned to him, tears in her eyes. "How did I get so lucky to be loved by 2 such good men? I am the lucky one. You gave me a family. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a reason to be brave." He pulled her close and kissed her, there in the garden with the flowers blooming around them and their son sleeping peacefully inside. 2 years after they had arrived in the settlement, Thomas stood in his fields watching Aldrich toddle after a butterfly, his small green hands reaching for something he could not quite catch. Grukara was laughing, her belly round again with their second child, a baby they had made together out of love and hope, and the stubborn belief that different peoples could build something beautiful if they tried. Their neighbors waved as they passed on the road, and Thomas waved back, marveling at how normal it all felt, how right. "Papa," Aldrich called, abandoning the butterfly to run to Thomas on unsteady legs. "Papa, up!" Thomas scooped him up and spun him around, delighting in his son's squeals of joy. Grukara joined them, and Thomas wrapped his free arm around her, holding his whole world in that embrace. "Happy?" she asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Thomas replied honestly. She kissed him, and Aldrich giggled between them, and in that moment, Thomas knew that every choice he had made, every risk he had taken, every moment of fear and doubt had been worth it. He had found his home, not in land or buildings, but in the family he had chosen and who had chosen him back. In the green-skinned woman who had collapsed in his snowfield and changed his life forever. In the son who called him Papa and the child growing in Grukara's belly. This was home. This was happiness. This was love that had conquered hate, hope that had survived despair, and a future built on the simple truth that mercy mattered more than vengeance. Thomas looked out over the fields he had planted, the house he had built, the life he had made, and he smiled. The past was behind them, full of pain and loss and war. But the future stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise, and they would face it together as they had always meant to. The spring when Aldrich turned 3 and his sister Elijah was 1, Thomas stood in the trading post buying seeds for the new growing season. The human merchant who ran the shop had become a friend over the years, and they chatted easily about crop rotation and weather predictions. "You have done well for yourself," the merchant said, watching through the window as Grukara played with the children in the town square. "Beautiful family. Thank you. I am a lucky man." "Lucky nothing. You made a choice that took courage, and you have built something good from it." The merchant handed Thomas his seeds. "There are more like you every year, you know, mixed families, people choosing love over old hatreds. You and your wife, You were pioneers whether you meant to be or not. Thomas had not thought of it that way, but looking around the settlement, he could see what the merchant meant. There were more mixed couples now than when they had first arrived. More children with green skin and blue eyes, or brown skin and tusks, or any combination in between. More proof that people could change, could choose differently, could build bridges instead of walls. That night, with both children asleep and Grukara dozing against his shoulder, Thomas thought about the journey that had brought them here. About the orc woman who had collapsed in his snowfield on the worst night of winter. About the choice to carry her inside, to stoke the fire for two, to offer mercy when hate would have been easier. It had changed everything. He had lost his father's farm, his old life, everything he had known. But he had gained a family, a purpose, a love deeper than anything he had imagined possible. Grukara stirred against him, her eyes opening sleepily. "What are you thinking about?" "About how glad I am that you collapsed in my field." She laughed softly. "That is a strange thing to be glad about." "Maybe, but it brought you to me. I would not change that for anything. Even though it cost you everything. It did not cost me everything. It cost me things that did not matter and gave me everything that does." He kissed her forehead. "You, Aldrich, Elijah, this life we have built. That is everything." She snuggled closer and Thomas held her, listening to her breathing even out as she fell back asleep. Outside, spring was arriving, bringing with it new growth, new possibilities, new life. And inside this house, in this moment, Thomas Mallory was exactly where he was meant to be. Years would pass. Children would grow. The settlement would expand and thrive. Thomas and Grukara would face challenges and joys, sorrows and triumphs, all the normal chaos of a life built together. But it all started with a choice made on a frozen winter night. A choice to show mercy, to offer warmth, to see a person instead of an enemy, a choice to carry her inside and stoke the fire for two, and that choice had made all the difference.